Welcome to First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. I'm your host, James Gardner, certified athletic therapist, certified strength and conditioning specialist, yoga instructor, human being. This platform, for the pros, by the pros, anybody in the performance space, and beyond. Welcome here to share in the stories of professionals, experiences, journeys, learning along the way. It's a platform to connect, to network, and to be a part of a community that cares, with conversations that matter, experiences that resonate, and generate ideas, thought-provoking, organic dialogue, passionate pros. Brought to you as always by First Star Therapy, Mobility Tape, Epic, and Benchmark Athletics, in association with the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association. It's First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. Thanks for being here. Thank you for being a part of it. All right, here we go. James Gardner and the Let's Chat Athletic Therapy Podcast here for official podcast of WFAT. And our special guest today is Ben Sporer, somebody I've had the opportunity to be next to, work beside, listen to, learn from, and be a part of his team on a number of aspects. But before we get to that, well, Ben, I'll jump into your bio and then a conversation about your new book, all the places you've been, all these kinds of things. So Ben Sporer, PhD. He found his passion for competitive sport in early adulthood and has since spent 25 years working in elite sport and human performance. He's held multiple roles with the Canadian Sports Institute and, as an accomplished physiologist, has led support teams at Summer and Winter Olympic Games, as well as at World Cup and World Championship events. In addition to his role as founder of Resync, a boutique consultancy firm for sports organizations, athletes, and corporate clients, Ben is an adjunct professor at the University of British Columbia and the vice president of performance strategy for the Vancouver Whitecaps FC of Major League Soccer. Ben, I really appreciate your time. Welcome aboard. I'll let you say hi, and we'll jump right in here.
First off, thanks, James. Really appreciate you inviting me. Great to reconnect, spend some time together, have a chat. We used to have many of these just in person, but it's nice to reconnect and have one of these today. So thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, amazing, man. Always great to see you and to hear from you. And before we even get into the conversation, congratulations. I think well, in our time together or my time in Vancouver with you, didn't even know this was coming. So a recent release of a book called Output, Optimizing Your Performance with Lessons Learned from Sports. So congratulations, first off, on getting that out there. And for our audience, like, I've started chipping away at this. In all honesty, I haven't got to the end of it, but just recently released. So I am working my way through it, and there's tons of lessons there, knowing who's written it, knowing what's gone into this in terms of your thought process. So congratulations on that.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it was not a lot of people knew a lot about it, to be honest with you. It was pretty much a side project for a couple of years, and it was really exciting to do it. Didn't want it to be a distraction where I work and such. So yeah, it was really a fun, challenging project for both me and my wife Trina. We worked on it together. She really was the driving engine behind the project. So it's exciting to see it come to life. And at the end of the day, it's like, wow, this is actually completed.
Amazing. And so that partnership and your partnerships that you've had along the way obviously kind of framed the writing of the book or some of the reasoning behind writing the book. And I'd love you to kind of share your pathway if you're comfortable with that. You started in sport and sort of early adulthood, and then worked your way into elite. And you and I had a little bit of a conversation about the word elite sort of offhand before. Maybe we'll dive into some of that too. But, 25 years working in elite sport and human performance at those top levels doesn't just happen overnight. You learn a lot of things along the way. You make a lot of mistakes along the way. What was sort of maybe the entry point for you into the elite space or the high performance end of things?
Yeah, so great starting point. When I first got into sport, I actually was in computers before. I loved sport as a kid growing up. I was super excited about every time I got to play a sport. It didn't matter. I'd play whatever I could. I played organized sport growing up, but I didn't play every organized sport. I'd play seasonal sport back then. It wouldn't be like you'd play it for a year or be super focused on one. I did play lacrosse right through junior and such, so I was always active in sport. Um, and I think when I went into computers, one of the things that really was interesting to me is that I was still really active in sport on a personal level. And then I made a choice, a shift came in my mindset at life that I just wanted to surround myself and be part of sport and high performance going forward in my career. So I went back to school. I walked into a physiology class at University of Victoria. Dr. Howie Wenger was teaching the class at the time, and just his passion around physiology as a whole, the way he brought physiology to life and the way he taught and more facilitated your learning than anything. It just really connected with me. Like I remember at that moment of the day, I get shivers just thinking about it and the excitement that he had about it. And right away, I latched onto that. Started working in hockey. I really enjoyed working in hockey. I love the game. I never played it growing up, but I just always was a fan of the sport. I mean, casually played it with some friends, but nothing like serious. And then I started working with a junior team in Victoria in the mid 90s ish, mid late 90s. And at that point, had moved into some other phases of my education and really got exposed to higher level sport with Dr. Wenger. He was working in the NHL at the time. I started helping him in some spaces that he was working in. We started doing research I went on to do my master's degree and eventually my PhD. And prior to starting my PhD, I had taken a role with which is now the Canadian Sport Institute Pacific, but it was called Pacific Sport at the time, as a physiologist, working with cycling, triathlon, Olympic sports. And at that point, it was really, I think I was one of the first, if not the first full-time paid physiologist to work with sport. And there was a lot of great people working with sport and Olympic sport in Canada at the time. And most of it was around the academic model where you'd work with a professor at a university and they'd do some testing or they provide a little bit of feedback. And my job at that time was to and say, hey, let's learn how to be with coaches in the daily training environment, work with athletes. And what was happening at Pacific Sport at that time, they were trying to model similar to what was happening with Australia and the AIS prior to the Sydney Olympics, leading up to Sydney. And they were working on a very similar approach. So unfortunately, the money fell through at that time. So the project got put on hold to build that institute. And I ended up they kept me on for a couple of years. And it was probably a year or two a couple of years after that, we were in the running for hosting the 2010 Olympic Games in Canada. And so there was another big resurgence of desire to sort of drive that in Canada. And Pacific Sport then ended up turning into the Canadian Sports Centre and hired Dr. Gord Sleevert, the late Dr. Gord Sleevert. He came in from New Zealand at the time. And he was another mentor of mine. And together, and he definitely drove a big piece of driving the Sport Institute model in Canada before his passing. And owe a lot to him. Worked a lot with him in helping set the Canadian Sport Institute Pacific, and then obviously many other people along that. And so throughout that time, I've been involved. My background's in physiology, my training's in physiology. I've done lots of research over the years, but at the same time, always been in the applied space. So it was really a great learning process to do both the academic, but also working full time while I was going to school. And, back then you were able to do that. I don't know, it's a bit more difficult to work full time and go to school now than it was back then, but that was a huge thing. And I think from there, I moved from more of a physiology approach where I'm still practicing as a physiologist, but I started being asked to lead and work with multidisciplinary teams. And then started to lead these teams to drive around building performance plans and performance structures for national sport organizations. And so led a couple of those groups through multiple Olympic Games. Eventually moved into professional sport. I still do some work with B210, which is, for those that don't know, it's a Canadian philanthropic private donor funded organization that really supports Olympic athletes in Canada for podium performances. So I still do a lot of Olympic work in that, but in the last 5 years, I've been primarily in the professional space.
Yeah, an amazing journey and lots of lessons even just to be pulled from that before we get to the lessons of, written out on the pages of your new book, Output. Yeah, just going back to the physiology piece, like, is it a prerequisite for physiologists in university to be super passionate? Because the guy that I had in my undergrad was the exact same way. You get up on stage, he's just like loves physiology, and he could talk anybody or convince anybody into being interested in it. And I think just based on passion. So maybe there's something there. And then that piece you talked about, facilitation of learning. If you've been in sport or around sport, all of a sudden, you may be good at it without knowing how you're good at a certain sport. And then you start to learn a little bit about physiology. You're like, wow, this is pretty cool. Like, I don't even have to think about that. And a bunch of this stuff is happening. And then there are people who are critically analyzing this stuff to understand how it's happening and how to have it happen a little bit differently or a little bit better or more efficiently. So I don't know, a pretty cool topic and a great pathway to sort of, get there. You talked obviously like started in computers and into humans, one machine to the thing that we try almost to mechanize in the performance space sometimes, where, if we do this, then it's going to directly impact this. And as you know, and as you write about, there isn't necessarily a right way to do that. And maybe just in terms of your looking back or reflecting, like the idea of optimization within computers and then optimization of humans, do they parallel each other, or does that sort of like I don't know, was that an interesting sort of transition for you from man-made to human, I don't know, tinkering, I guess?
I love that you pulled that out. That's great. Yeah, it's interesting. I often think about that, and one of the things that was really I loved when I was working in computers. I loved the ability and the actual when working in this. And let me rephrase this first. That when I worked in computers, it was before the internet was available, right? So there was no internet, but it was on a cusp of a lot of changes. And we used to use a system called Profs in the United States, which was an academic thing, which ended up being the premise for email and the internet, the whole backbone. So, but what I did love about it was the ability to systematically look at how pieces came together to create an output. And I mean, it's funny I use that word now. I never really thought about that connection back then, but you're putting together a bunch of different pieces of computer material and hardware, and then software to actually run that. And if you have a different software, that hardware functions differently. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that was a little bit challenging to me is that, hardware and software is constantly adapting and evolving. And the reason why it constantly adapts and evolves is because there's a limitation to all those pieces, which is interesting. But at the same time, it's very structured in the way that you move from one space to the next space, and one evolution of a computer to the next evolution of the computer. But that concept of thinking in a systems approach, because I was always looking at how part of my role was, how do we build up these systems? When I went into physiology, I think the thing that really excited me a ton about it was a lot of the same concepts of a systems approach to solving a problem, but it was real, it was alive, it was dynamic. And that, well, I take 5 computers that, yeah, they might vary a little bit, but they all have the same sort of process. They all have the same sort of computing power. Well, when I take 2 humans, they're actually, even though they might look the same, they're actually quite different. Mm-hmm. And then there's other things that influence that, from, your training history, your genetics, your exposures, your parents, as of, the genetic side of things, your likes and your dislikes, how you train or how you respond to a training is going to be influenced by your likes and dislikes. It's also going to be influenced by what you eat. It's going to be influenced by how you recover. It's going to be influenced by, are you mentally strong enough to push harder through another rep or another set? And so what I loved about physiology was really the systems approach, and that you can't think of these things in isolations, even though we do as humans, we like to break them up. But there's always this endless puzzle that you're trying to figure out. And I really viewed physiology as a puzzle. And that as much as, even when I read science, so I digress a little bit here, but even as I read science that's related to physiology, early on, I always found myself thinking, okay, this is great from a norm, like, but I also see all these people that respond differently. And in my head, I'm like, the science is really, really important. It's really important to help us provide thought processes around, are there things that actually impact it that we don't think impact it? What controls do we have in place? Like it's really, really important. It's also really important to understand what is the majority of people respond to. So is there something else influencing this individual's response?
Right.
So I'm not to say like I really value the science, but when I looked at a P05, I would always say, well, and I use this joke often, but okay, if it's less than 0.05, it's significant, but this one's not significant, but it's because it's 0.07. But as a practitioner, if I'm going to ask you to say, how do you apply? Are you willing to apply this with 0 negative option, but 7 out of 100 won't have a response, whereas less than 5? Is that much of a difference as a practitioner? I don't think so. So where I'm going with that is that I think the context and where physiology, I think, was really helpful in me bringing in the context into my thought process. Is that everybody's physiology is different, and you need to think about those little things. And I actually loved that puzzle. I enjoyed it right from the beginning. And like I say, Dr. Wenger, how he just exploded that perspective for me.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing. And it's a great capture to sort of, I don't know, pulls me in a lot of different directions on where to go on the conversation. But this idea, again, I want to come back around to the book, and I have a page pulled out where I just want to read a quote from, but we'll get to that part. I promise the listeners we'll get to that part. It's Ben Sporer. His new book is called Output. Make sure you get this. Do the thing. Do the outcome-based thing and buy the book and get called Output. So this is the thing. So the facilitation of learning that you touched on with the physiologists and that you learned from and the people that you've been around. And then in our space as practitioners, evidence guided practice versus evidence-based practice versus evidence-informed practice, like a lot of different language here, but having had the opportunity to be a part of a team that you were a part of and sort of integrated understanding of what performance can be, what each individual has. Like there's definitely an art that needs to be applied to being a practitioner, whether that's a practitioner of physiology. And I think in the past, there was always sort of a big divide between making the science meaningful or just having data that was, let's call it science. And then you have practitioners on the floor doing the work, like how to integrate that. So maybe that's a nice little leeway. I think when you talked about it, like you started with computers where there was no internet, and now we're in a day and age where humans, like everyone has the answer through the internet and through social media and all these different things. So maybe just quickly before we get to the book on application of knowledge, application of understanding. You see lots of practitioners, you work with lots of practitioners. It's one thing that I really admired about being around you, one of many things, but being around you is your ability that you're not hands-on, but you understand the hands-on. And I think that's the other way where a lot of practitioners may or may not understand the science, but if you're the sciencey side of things, you also need to understand the application processes when you're dealing with high-level athletes or human beings in general. So wherever you want to take that one.
Yeah, you touched on a couple of really key points for me there. First, I'll just touch base on the being hands-on. In the role where I worked with you, I wasn't as hands-on, and in that environment, I still to this day go through files. Like I make sure that as a part of everything I do, I am hands-on in one aspect of my career and my roles. So I think it's really important.
And I just meant literally like physically hands-on, like the
no, I know what you're saying. Yeah, for sure. But I mean, physically hands-on, like when I say I go through files, like I work one-on-one with
absolutely
that I manage and look at every aspect of data and then work with them in different environments. So I have multiple roles that I carry. So I always make sure that that's part of what I'm doing at any point over the next 10 years. It will always be part of what I do because I love it. I think a big part of that is I was hands-on for so many years, like, and like where I was like 100% hands-on from the get-go. Of whenever I was going through school, I was working hands-on with athletes. I was on the bus with teams, traveling with them. I was on the road for 35 days and straight, or 6 weeks straight, sleeping with someone else and like three people in a room, and
Right.
understanding the nuances and listening to athletes and seeing them on buses, and understand what it takes to take a 9-hour flight and then get up and then travel in a bus for 6 hours to your next destination, to stay in a substandard location. So, and then also working on the snow at -20, and or in the heat at 40 degrees on the side of a hill and on a mountain bike course, like passing water bottles, all those aspects of being hands-on. There's no other way to get that except for doing it. And I think that's a very important piece. So like in the situation where we work together with the club, is that, when staff is saying to me that, look, I'm away from my family for 7 days, or I know what that's like. I lived it. I've been there. I know what it's like when an athlete decides that they don't want to do something, or they're just not being compliant exactly with the protocols, or they're not, doing their prehab or rehab on a daily basis. And but I also know what it's like, that saying, well, they're not doing it isn't the answer. I know what it's like to say it's up to us to figure out a way to get through and facilitate, right? So I tie this to that facilitation piece, because as a teacher and learning from some pretty amazing professors and mentors, facilitation is a really, really important part of what I do as both a hands-on practitioner, but also as a leader when I work with building teams and strategy. It's a key word in my philosophy. I think by facilitating individuals, be it athlete, coaches, practitioners, to learn how to apply what they're doing, facilitate a direction on which to go. And one of the things I try to always say is that when I facilitate, I actually try to always have people think about, it becomes their idea, right? And so it's their choice to do the prehab. It's their choice to, pick up the water balls and help the kit people move stuff. It's their choice to go over and speak to the other practitioner, to think and ask the questions about, what do you think about this challenge? So I really see that facilitation, even in practice as a single practitioner, or facilitation perspective as a leader, is about creating a mindset for people where they're taking the initiative, they own it. And a big part of the reason why that is, James, is I talk about sustainability. Like, as a practitioner, I learned that it's really easy for me to prescribe something for someone and say, and be on top of them and say, you need to do this workout, or here's the workout you have to do because it's the right workout. And they'll do it for a week, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 3 months. But the minute I walk away, it's not sustainable majority of the time. And so the facilitating someone to see why they're doing what they're doing, facilitating someone to understand, how it relates to what they're trying to achieve, facilitating someone to say, actually, I'm choosing to do this. I'm not being told to do this. And then it becomes a mindset for them, and it actually becomes their idea. They own it. You walk away from that scenario right now after that, and then all of a sudden you've built sustainability. And I think as a practitioner, for me personally, or some of the stuff that we were talking about there, is that's the goal of, at least for me, in any project I work on, whether it be an athlete, is to facilitate that athlete or that individual or that practitioner or that club or that strategy to be sustainable without me. Mm-hmm. And when I'm able to achieve that, like, okay, I'm pretty proud of that personally. And I'm able to walk away from a project knowing myself personally, like I did X to help facilitate that. And um, I think that that's the success for me quite often, is being able to step away from that and know that it continues on.
Yeah, some amazing lessons obviously there too. And for the practitioners that are listening, young, old, somewhere in your career along the way, get out of the lab, get out of the clinic, and get in the arena. Or if you're only in the arena, get in the lab and get in the clinic, because there's lots to be had there. Conversations, just being a fly on the wall, seeing how things operate in there. And I love obviously the empowerment piece of, when we empower the human being underneath the jersey, performance will be enhanced, right? Even if it is literally just them helping pick something up, they'll feel better about it. They help somebody else, and all of a sudden, these are the intangibles that aren't measurable necessarily by certain metrics on a field or from a quote unquote science standpoint. But I love that, finding the why, and that's the boost for performance. I think that often we miss, and now having the opportunity to work with teenagers, a lot of the messaging that you put so eloquently in the book and in our discussions with the club, while I was out there, we're trying to provide for our teenagers so that our teenage athletes can begin to shift the mindset towards output over outcome, because the outcome at the end of the day, as and I'm going to read this quote directly, may or may not be the right thing to be focusing on. But a couple lessons that I've taken and sort of begun to apply or continue to apply in this space. So just on that note of leaving it better or being able to walk away knowing that you had impact, lots on this side, and then in turn, the ripple or trickle effect to the now the youth athletes, the amateur athletes, and the practitioners that I have the opportunity to work with here, is that like focus on that output. What you do in this moment is what's ultimately going to lead to the outcome. So if you give away moments, your outcome isn't going to be what you think it is anyway. So, and then the other piece that I want to share with the world is the environment that you created or enhanced in that club in the time that I was there, was this terminology I think you used day one, maybe, or something like that, maybe even in the interview process, respectful discourse. So having a lot of people in the room that are understanding of the process, understanding of the things at play, but can challenge each other respectfully in that space. And that's facilitation of learning, that's facilitation of understanding, knowledge, and application all in one. So before you run, because I know we can run into a whole lot there, I just wanted to publicly, thank you and the club and all the guys that were and girls that were a part of that club there that have shaped, where I'm at now, and where everybody that's getting information from me has a little bit of a reach back to you and the team out there. So thank you for that. And that's a major message, I think, that impact piece. When you can walk away knowing that person on the other side of the table or the other side of the room is better, you've done a job. It's not about how much they're paying you. It's not about how much, how many vacation days you can get because they're padding your wallet. It's literally about that empowerment piece and knowing you've done a good job if you can literally walk away and know that they know what they're doing.
Well, thanks for those kind words. I'm glad you took that from that. That makes me feel good.
All right, well, let's shift gears to the book, because I mean that's one of the primary things. I also wanted to share you share a little bit about our relationship, our dynamic, and all of your background, because it's a truly incredible path, and I know a lot of people may not know you yet, and hopefully a few more do after this. So literally, I think I can flip to any page in this book and find something that I can pull off and start a conversation, at least in our performance space, and certainly with you being the author. Again, it's Ben Sporer. His book is Output: Optimizing Your Performance with Lessons Learned from Sport. So it's one of the pages central to the book. In bold letters, output is not the same as outcome, period. You could have one of the best performances of your season or even of your career and still lose the game. Run with that.
Yeah. So it's a tenet in the book, obviously. I mean, call it output. I think it's the easiest way to describe that, James, is we often refer to high performers as those who win. They're the ones that won. What a great performer that individual is. Or the person that's built the billion-dollar company or whatever it might be. But one of the things that, having just through lots of experiences in different sports at different spaces, and then even translating that over to, clients that I work with who may be in the business sector, one of the things that became really clear to me is that there are far more high performers than just the person that wins. And I use an example in the book because it's really easy for people to understand, is that you go to an Olympic Games and the person finishes fourth. And the pundits or the people who are just observing that and wanting their country to win the medal might say, oh, that's actually not a high performance, or they just we can't convert, we're not good enough to convert.
Right.
Well, if that person's expectation leading into that competition was to win a gold medal, and they had proven that they have the capabilities and profile to actually win that gold medal, then and they don't win the gold medal, how do you know that that wasn't a high performance, right? Just because of the gold medal? Because I think there's a difference between, and this is where I get into the aspects of output versus outcome. If you know what that person's capabilities are, and we measure performance quite often on outcomes, whether it be in the business sector or in the sports sector, and we love that in sport because that's why we play sport. We compete to be successful. But if we measure the performance, let's call it performance, because that's a big thing, as the outcome, yet there was a mechanical, or in team sport, there was a bad call that you have no control over, and you don't get the outcome that you're expecting, but you delivered at or just slightly above your personal best ever. Are you not a high performer? And I ask that question because I've personally experienced it in many situations where we have people on a key moment deliver the performance of their life, yet they finish 7th or 8th at the Olympics, or they finish 4th just outside of a medal. And I would say every single thing about them is a high performer. Now they still may go on to be a gold medalist. They'll still go on to be future champion, multiple world champion. But when you measure your performance based on the outcome, there's too many factors in play that you actually have no control over, as much as we like to think we do. What you do have control over, and what should be somewhat predictable, is your output. And because performance is actually an action. Performance is what you do in that moment, right? It's not the outcome. Performance is how you delivered a series of steps and actions to achieve a specific objective. Okay. So what that relates to, that's an integrated output. Output is what you did on the field in a soccer game, from the start whistle to the end whistle, or in a basketball game. It's what you did from the time the start gun went off in a race till the very end of it. The output is what you have full control over. You have control for how you mentally respond in a situation to a tactic by your opponent. You have control over how you deliver or push yourself to the point where you have to be at to deliver the maximal physical output you have. You have control over how you technically execute skills, right? But you don't have control over how prepared your opponents are. You have no control over who you're competing against. We see this in sport all the time. A better talented team with better prepared coaches, more talent, and you might beat them. And so, but you might have your best performance and they might not have their best performance and you win. You still might have your best performance and they have their best performance and you don't win. But you're still performing at a very high level. And so I think that, I went on a big roundabout there, but the key message to come out of that is that you have control over your output and you have control over how you prepare for your output. What you don't have control over is the outcome.
The unpredictable elements of sport, the unpredictable elements of life. I don't know what the weather's going to be like, all of these things, right? So
yeah, there's so many things that come into that, but I would even say, like, not even just the unpredictables, even the predictables, right? So like, and I use this, I talk about this a little bit in the book later on, is that, your expectations and your evaluation of your performance should be based on your expectations from your profile, your team profile, your individual profile. That's how you should evaluate your performance. And that profile will deliver an output, and that's your understanding of that. What you do need to do, though, and this is really important where people miss this step, and this is one of the biggest challenges I see in sport and in individual, is being honest about what's the output that's required to increase the likelihood that you can achieve your objective, which is your outcome. Many people do not spend the time or effort to be honest about what that output is that's required. They sort of wing it. They go by, yeah, I'm going to train. I need to get faster. Okay, great.
Right.
I need to be stronger. Great. But what's the actual output that's required? And a good example of this is track cycling. It's one of the most quantifiable sports. You have to put out a certain amount of power output to go a certain speed relative to aerodynamic drag in a single individual pursuit. It's super quantifiable. But the output's just not putting out the power. The output's putting out that power with a whole crowd cheering at the Olympic Games. The output's putting out that power when you're mentally saying, body saying, stop. Like, this hurts. So you need to be mentally strong enough. The output, and to be mentally strong enough and to be mentally focused enough, you have to be able to just avoid a lot of distractions. The output that's required is to make sure that your preparation in that time frame leading up to that is almost perfect, right? You can't just sort of randomly throw different preparation things in. So being true about what that output is required is really, really important. And a lot of people just miss that gap.
Yeah, I love this. And I think like a good teaser for those that haven't read the book to read the book. There's a lot of good direction in here. And maybe if we just shift gears, and I don't want to take too much of your time. I know you got a busy schedule. It's interesting that you bring that up because, again, like working with teenagers in an academy space now, it's kind of like they want the thing, but not quite sure they're ready to put in the effort that it takes or the requirements to get to that objective, right? I want the scholarship. I want to get drafted. I want. But then you're with them every day and you're watching what they're putting in. And it's like, well, that want is going to need to, or else the output needs to be elevated. And we need to do a better job as coaches and practitioners driving that or finding a way to connect so that it can be enhanced. So really great touch points there.
Can I just say one quick thing on that?
Yeah.
Problem with that, James, is you've identified a really important challenge. There's a disconnect. And that's why I say that, and it's absolutely critical, and this is where the biggest gaps come at all levels. There's a disconnect between what they want as an outcome and objective versus understanding what's required to actually achieve it.
Yep.
And that's one of the biggest messages.
Yeah, and the big H word that you managed to bring out as well, which is an honest assessment of what it takes, right?
Yeah.
An honest assessment of, is this objective, for me within my sort of reservoir or whatever,
And the first part to that is really understanding why you want that objective. So like, and you talk about developing athletes, right? There's a lot of, I'd say, people who aren't honest with themselves about why that objective is actually important to them. They don't really want that objective. Mm-hmm. They like the objective because somebody else likes it, or because it sounds great that I'm in an elite program, or so being honest about why you're actually playing the sport or why you love playing the sport, it helps clarify a whole bunch really early on.
Yeah, find that why, and I'll transition that to practitioners as well. If you don't know why, you better figure, because you won't get to where you think you're going to get to, whether that's the results with a patient on the table or playing a sport or all those kind of things, if you haven't identified that base foundation. One last teaser maybe for the book, and intentionally done. You talk about key action items to driving success and setting objectives and preparing and designing a roadmap for performance, and that can be applied to sport or as a practitioner. Spin it as a practitioner, maybe more on like the executive function, right, of performance. Output matters. How do we enhance? And we've talked about the why, and we've talked about sort of providing a roadmap, but any sort of direction in terms of what that roadmap could or should look like, or how to find a roadmap maybe, or begin a roadmap. Key starting points, I guess, from that side.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about a few different steps in the book, which I think are pretty straightforward. Like, first of all, you define your what and why, and really be honest about what that is. And like we talked about, you really have to understand why you're being a practitioner or why you're in sport X.
And I don't think many do, when it comes.
No, we do. We just do. Like we get busy. We get focused on stuff, and it's actually okay. And when I say this is the big thing I need to emphasize here is that we talk about one piece, right? But we often forget about some of the other pieces. And you and I have talked about this before. But like we talk about being an athlete in sport X. Well, do you want to be the best athlete you can be, but also have a lot of time with your friends, right? And go to school full time. That's really your objective. And don't disconnect the objective of being just an athlete and the best athlete you can be without the objective of going to school full time and really valuing your friendships and your family. Because the minute you forget about those other pieces, and people listening might say, well, that's obvious. Yeah, it is obvious, and it should be obvious. Yet it happens time and time again where we as individuals focus on one of these pieces to say, this is my objective. Well, it's actually not your objective. You've got objectives to do this while you do this. Right. And so that's where I say really, really defining your what and why and being honest about that is really important. Then obviously if you're able to define what that output that's required to deliver on your objective, then it's understanding where you are relative to that. And so you talk about young athletes that want to get to a level that's up here, and but they're here, and so there's a timeline component to some of these. And so what is your realistic gap? Is that a gap that you're going to close in a year? Is it a gap you're going to close in 3 months or 4 years? And then you actually set your performance output that's required almost in intermediate steps. So I think that's an important piece, right? So knowing that timeline is really, really important. And you can do that for each of the different gaps. You sort of start to figure out what you need. Obviously, you have to prioritize. So I use an analogy that Dr. Wenger shared with me, and it still sticks with me today, about the pitcher of water and the multiple glasses on the table, and you only have one pitcher of water, which is your time. You get to choose how many glasses you want to fill up and how much you want to fill them up. And you can do that at each level from a sense of prioritizing which gaps you want to address. You can do that at each level from a sense of what are the pieces of your overall objective. But you need to prioritize, and only you can prioritize. You can look to other people for help, for information, but you ultimately have to get to a point to say, what are the things that I'm actually going to prioritize? Because nobody has enough time to do it all. And when you're prioritizing, it's really important to think about what's the net performance impact, right? So I talk about this a little bit in the book, and we see this often, and even going back to some of the discussions when you're with the club, we sit in a room and we say, these are all the things an athlete can do to get better. Okay, well, we can train them over here more, but they need more technical work over here, and they need some more tactical work over here, but all that's going to combine physical load. And we say, well, we're going to spend more time on tactics, but as a strength coach, I need to actually really work on their speed. Well, what's the amount of return you're going to get for the amount of time you put into working on that speed relative to what you might take away from ability to effectively train tactics or technique? What's your return from a sense? Do you actually have a negative impact on tactics or technique? And then bringing those together in that integrated perspective to say, you know what? As much as I know I can make this person faster, and it's going to take this work, I can do it. I can build a program for it. Like, I know I can, right? You have to be willing to say, actually, I'm not doing that right now because the net performance impact is negative if I take away from this other piece over here. What I find people do often, and we talk about building this plan or roadmap, is that they try to do too much. They try to focus on too many things, and I try to emphasize, really the starting point is 2 or 3 things in the book, and make sure that they're interactions, because you need to think of them as integrated pieces. You understand their integration and how they impact each other.
Right. Amazing. Net performance impact. That's a great one. And I think I just wrote it down, highlighted it right in the center around a bunch of dots around it. And, again, the analogy with the water pitcher and the glasses. And it's a constant reminder, to sort of recenter or refocus on what is the output, what are the objectives, with that output, and what do you need to do to get there. So again, Ben Sporer is here. He's our guest on Let's Chat, official podcast of WFAT, optimizing your performance with lessons learned from sport. Ben, an amazing read, obviously went out for our on sale officially late October, output-book.com. You can find that. You can find lots of ways to get it. I'll put this into the notes on the show as well for all those listeners. You can find it there. I want to push this out there because of our interactions, but also because, high quality and really sort of high value. As soon as you turn the page, or something else. As soon as you turn the page, it's applicable to daily life just as much as it is performance. You can apply it with your clientele as a coach or practitioner, as well as to your own practice as whatever your role is, whatever role you need to apply it to. So Ben, really, for today and for everything, thank you so much for your time, for your commitment, and for getting this book out there, because I think a lot more people need this in the space. And I look forward to opening that, our listeners up to you if they don't know you, or enhancing what they do know about you today and beyond on the airwaves here with the podcast. So I'll let you close it out however you wish, but truly, grateful for your time, not only today, but every interaction that we have. So thank you so much, and over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for just the relationships we've had over the years, and even collaborations. It's always been a pleasure working with you. And I'm excited to see what you're doing all the time. So whenever I catch up and see what's going on in James' life, it's great to see. Thanks for having me on, and I really appreciate your kind words around the book and what it meant to you and what it means to you. And I think that I'm grateful for that. So really appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day. To all our listeners, reach out to Ben if you need to. We'll put up some contact information. You can reach out through me if you ever need to check in with him. More than happy to connect if and when he's got some time after the new release of Output, Optimizing Your Performance with Lessons Learned from Sport. Ben Sporer, thank you so much. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Continue to connect.
Thank you.
Thanks again for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this community. Check us out online, firststartherapy.com. That's FIRSTAR therapy.com. Or email us with feedback, consult@firststartherapy.com. CONSULT@firststartherapy.com. On Instagram @firststar.therapy, and our podcast host @letschat.at. This is First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast.